Okay, well, I was born into a lower middle class family, I would say. My father was a salesman.
Mm.
My mother was then a clerk in the British Army.
Mm.
And we kind of grew up mostly speaking English at home because my mother, being a Peranakan, is not very good with any of the Chinese languages. I mean, she is Hokkien, and of course she can speak some Hokkien, but I think my parents had decided that maybe for our sake, better that we speak in English at home. So we all grew up speaking English at home,
Right.
with a smattering of Hokkien on my mother's side.
Mm.
Talking to my grandfather. My grandmother had passed away very early, and she was also Peranakan. So
Mm.
they all grew up speaking English.
Mm.
My father's side, my grandfather, my paternal grandfather, came from China.
Right.
He came from a small little village called Xilun, which is sort of in between Teochew City and Swatao.
Mm.
So we are Teochews, right? And so I also grew up learning to speak some Teochew, mainly to, again, my grandparents.
Mm.
My grandfather, and then after his death, mainly my grandmother.
Right.
But at home, it was basically English,
Mm.
with a little bit of Malay here and there, a little bit of Hokkien, a little bit of Teochew.
Right. So
Yeah.
It was quite typical of that time.
Yeah, and then later on, we picked up Cantonese because then we had a Cantonese helper
Mm.
in the house, a live-in Ama.
Mm.
So with her, we picked up Cantonese. So yeah, so thanks to all that, we are quite conversant with a number of languages and dialects.
Right.
Although not to any great proficiency,
Mm.
but certainly manageable to get along with life, right?
Mm.
Yeah, yeah.
So in terms of educational level, how would you say your parents were?
Well, my mom, I think, left school after Sec 3. My
Right.
father finished his O-level at a very mature age because of the war.
Mm.
So I think he was maybe about 20 years old when he finished his
Right.
O-level. He himself had been, I think my grandfather had sent him to a Chinese school
Mm.
to start with,
Mm.
so learning formal Mandarin, along with his brothers. They had a family of 10, right? So
Right.
it's a big family. But none of the brothers, in fact, none of the brothers or sisters could survive the Chinese school, so they all switched to English school later on. Because as you can imagine, right, if you only speak Teochew at home,
Mm.
and it's not as if parents write to you.
Mm.
So the script is common,
Mm.
but the language is completely different. So
Mm.
it's like learning another foreign language. So if you're learning another foreign language, I think for them all, learning English was a lot easier
Mm.
than trying to learn Mandarin. It's totally different from
Mm.
Teochew, right?
Mm.
Yeah. So all of them went to Chinese school for a little while, and then all, I think, did really badly and couldn't manage.
Mm.
So my grandfather later began to switch them all, at least the boys, he sent them all to St. Andrews.
Right.
And that's largely also through the active sort of, the evangelical work of Canon Adams,
Mm.
who was the principal of St. Andrews School,
Mm.
who could speak Teochew very well.
Ah.
Okay, so he knew that because of St. Andrews, and the whole Hougang area where most of the Teochews, basically a Teochew area,
Mm.
he would go, house to house, and he would actually, accept boys of all kinds of backgrounds.
Mm.
Yeah, so he persuaded my grandparents to send all the sons to St. Andrews School lah.
Mm.
So obviously, in terms of communication between my parents, my father was conversant in English. Obviously, my mother obviously grew up speaking English, so it was very natural that when my sister and I only have one sister,
Right.
two of us, we were all speaking English at home, right? Yeah.
So, which primary school did your parents enroll you in?
Well, we went to a school that's now defunct.
Right.
It's called Farrer Primary School. It's
Mm.
what you would today call a neighborhood school.
Mm.
Mainly because it was sort of within a mile of our home
Mm.
nearby.
Mm.
So you know, even if you can't catch a bus, you can walk to school. It's not
Right.
that difficult. In those days, it's all quite safe to do that, right?
Right, right.
Yeah. So we went to this Farrer Primary School, and that's when we first encountered the study of Mandarin lah.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, we had no Mandarin whatsoever. I mean, we went to kindergarten, Li Kuo Chuan Kindergarten, which was Salvation Army, and of course studied in English. There was no exposure to Mandarin at all, right? And any exposure to a language other than English was on television, and most of the time it was Cantonese. Because you know, my mother would watch all these Cantonese movies with Jie Yin and all these were very, very popular then. And like I said, we had a Cantonese ama, and so our exposure to non-English other than smattering. In fact, at one point, I think I was told by my parents, I cannot remember this, but they said when I was very, very young, I was very good in Teochew, and then later on became better at Cantonese because of the Cantonese ama. They had to speak a lot more to her than to my parents in Teochew. It wasn't necessary. And then, so that was it. And then when we got to primary school, then for the first time we encountered Mandarin.
Right.
Yeah.
So how did you feel when you entered primary school and then suddenly had to encounter?
Well, I mean, mentally we were quite prepared. We knew we have to go and study this thing called Mandarin, right? But we have no idea what it is, right? It was very puzzling at first, because you know, we thought, okay, you go to school, you have to study Chinese. They said, but you mean the Teochew we speak not Chinese, then Cantonese not Chinese, then say, well, okay, it's Mandarin, but you know, Huayi lah, okay, so you know, or Huawen. So that's my our first encounter with Mandarin.
Right. What year was this, if you remember?
Yeah, sure. Primary one was in 1968.
Right.
Yeah. So yeah, of course, you know, primary one, you spend most of the time learning your 3 R's, English, reading, writing, arithmetic, and then Chinese. And what was interesting in our time, say, compared to now, was that in the first 2 years, primary one and primary two, you had very basic subjects. You didn't do more than English, Chinese, and mathematics.
Right.
Right, but then when you got to and a little bit of science, but you know, it's all very rudimentary. By the time you got to primary three, then they kind of ramped things up a bit. So you were doing quite a few subjects, and I was within that experimental group when they were trying to make Chinese almost like a first language in the English schools. Right, I think there was this transition when, you know, from the late 60s onwards, I think the demographics was such that many parents who would have sent their children to Chinese schools began switching them to the English schools, right? So this was a demographic that was happening at that time,
right.
A natural phenomenon, and I think the government, you know, was also concerned. Okay, you don't want to lose mastery of Chinese language. Let's try and, you know, up the content that's taught in Mandarin. So other than so-called Chinese lessons, which are pure language lessons, in primary three we did history and geography in Chinese,
Right.
which was very hard. You know, I mean, yeah. So it's really funny. I mean, you know, my first encounter with Stamford Raffles was Sir Tam Fu Lai Fu Shi. You know, it's like, oh, who is the heck is this guy, right? You know, and even concepts like area, you know, Fang Li and all this. So this